Gender-affirming healthcare should be accessible for minors. We'll start by having everyone that agrees come up now. Okay, who would like to start?
I will. So I'm going to be very blunt about this. I think that we need to, I don't think the average citizen can make a decision about this. I don't think anybody's opinion about this really matters. The only opinion that matters, I trust, is the current medical opinion from the leading medical science in the industry, in that specific industry. I trust the medical professionals, I trust doctors, and I trust any researchers who are specific experts in that field to make that decision. And the current WPATH standards say that gender-affirming care saves children's lives. That's as far as I'm willing to go on that.
There's a lot of stigma around young youth, trans youth getting gender-affirming care. But when you say gender-affirming care, that doesn't mean surgery immediately. Most of the time, it just means getting them socially transitioned and helping with that. And then, the start of stopping a transition that they're not wanting to do. And you can always put a pause. And yes, there's side effects, but they do that for kids who aren't trans. They put kids that aren't trans on hormones because their hormones are out of balance. So I'm not saying let's jump to surgeries. That's not what gender-affirming care means. Gender-affirming care is doing all the things to get a person to be comfortable living their life. And it's excruciatingly painful to be a trans person and not be able to do anything about it because you're underage. That is one of the worst feelings in the world, and to have to live that every single day. So imagine you come out at 10. Now you have 8 years that you have to sit there and wait. And in Nebraska, 9. So that's kind of where I stand on it. I think it's important to have access for everybody.
Is having the surgery, is that technically gender-affirming care or not?
That is a part of it, but it's not.
Okay, so I want to be direct.
Yeah.
Do you think that the surgery should be able to be had for minors?
If you're saying minor,
because I think that's like when the minor would be under 18.
Yeah.
And I just think that's like the people watching, that might be the one that they're thinking like.
Yeah. Like surgery, that's not happening with gender-affirming care. That's underage. That's not like surgeries aren't happening underage. They're happening when you are of age. Gender-affirming care for minors is the hormones and those things to stop you from fully fully developing into the wrong gender.
Do you think it should be, I'm not saying is it happening, I'm saying should it be able to happen? In your opinion, is all I'm asking.
I don't know. I don't really think that it's by person.
Okay, fair. Yeah.
I don't think
completely fair.
If your medical team decides that that's something that they're comfortable doing, cool and awesome. But I think your medical team and your therapist and whoever's working with you, they need to help make that decision. I don't think I can make a decision for them.
I agree with what Emmy was saying. It saves lives. At the end of the day, I'm a psychology major in college, got my degree in it, and we learn all about suicide rates, all of that. Like they were saying over there, gender-affirming care can include multiple things. I know you're referring to the surgery specifically because that's what people automatically will think when that question is asked. However, it can include going to a therapist that respects your pronouns. It can be puberty blockers. So if you haven't hit puberty yet, you can take puberty blockers. It'll stop that temporarily, and then you can have a little bit more time to figure it out because it's a confusing time. I can only relate it to my experience of being a gay person and figuring out that was my identity. Very different, but you see what the tie is that I'm making here. Like at the end of the day, providing those types of care, whether it be a therapist, blockers, medicine, whatever, opposed to surgery, that's still gonna help save lives at the end of the day. Now, I agree. I think it is on a person-to-person basis when it comes to the surgery aspect of things. I don't think any one of us can sit here and say this is exactly how this needs to happen because the severity differs for everybody that's involved in that situation. So someone can be really, really low and need that to feel themselves. I know that, or feel like themselves. Cutting my hair made me feel. That's a type of gender affirming care for me, or I guess more so towards my sexual identity, which is different, but I know what that changed in my life, so I can only imagine what those types of care or like options can do for someone in the trans youth. So that's where I stand on it.
I totally agree with everything that you guys said. One thing I want to point out is that the really important thing about this specific topic is that we need to create more awareness that gender affirming care is not just surgery. And that is one of the things that makes this very challenging for youth, especially for youth that needs this type of healthcare. We need to make sure that we're giving each person an opportunity, especially during puberty, to explore and understand ourselves, because that is a difficult part of our life, and adding the pressure of our parents and our community resisting our growth and our self-awareness is harmful. It can lead to losing people's lives at a young age, of which we could have prevented, or we can prevent, by making sure that this type of healthcare is accessible to them.
Okay, and I think that's a good time to bring up everyone that disagrees.
So I didn't come sit down because of the word healthcare. I think it was used. I do think trans kids are valid, and their identity matters. But I put myself in the shoes of a 10-year-old, and like the decisions I made and like what I thought about myself when I was 10, I don't feel the same way now. I brought up my little sister earlier. Like, she has such a giant imagination where, she thinks she's a whole bunch of things right now, and that's fine. She's a child. She can live like that. If she came to me and told me she was trans, that's great. We'll cut your hair. We'll get you new clothes. I'll call you whatever you want. But when it comes to making permanent changes on your body, I don't agree that a child should be able to make that decision. Because even at 18, I got tattoos on my body that I wish I didn't get, and now they're permanently there. Like, you just can't make educated decisions. I feel like kids can't process thinking long term, and what it might do. It could affect reproductive systems and all that, and change the outcome of their life entirely. And I'm not saying like they're going to regret transitioning either, but there is the high possibility that they will. Like, a lot of kids, and you said that minors are not going through surgery. They have, and it has happened. And a lot of them that have, once they become adults and their frontal lobe is developed, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, I regret doing this. And that is just as bad on someone's mental health as the other outcome. So, like, yes, it's a slippery slope. I don't think they should be getting hormone replacement therapy. I can maybe understand like hormone blockers, but when it comes to surgically changing your body, I do not think that should be permitted until 18, and you go through all the steps of meeting with the psychiatrist and all that stuff, completely understanding what choice you're going to be making, the long-term impact that could happen, and everything beyond that.
I want to quickly push back on just a couple things. Specifically, let's be clear, the child is not the only one making this decision. We have two parents, therapies, and doctors that are all required to make that decision. And then jumping to surgeries, let's look at the specific surgeries. The specific surgeries that are happening are mastectomies. That's the only one that I know of. You can correct me if I'm wrong. In fact, I invite you to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm okay being wrong. But as far as I'm aware of, and the research I've done, mastectomies are the only surgery that are being done before the age of 18, and that they are extremely rare to be done, and they need approval from the doctor, a therapist, and then both parents. And at that point, when a mastectomy does happen, that child has most likely been living that life for a very long time. before a doctor's willing to sign off on mastectomies because they're scared to. They're scared to sign off on mastectomies because of the very reasons you were talking about, regret. And then I want to shift to regret. The people who do detransition or regret, our population is 1% of America, but of that population that decides to detransition, it's another 1%. So 1% of
0.1%.
0.1%. It's extremely small margin of people who decide, who regret it. And I'm not gonna sit here and say, oh, I don't care about those people. I do. I care for the harm. I care for the hurt that they're going through. But when I look at the children who could be saved from suicide rates, from cutting themselves, from any other self-harm, I look at that and I say, that is so much better than the 0.01% that regret. That's kind of where I sit. I'm sorry for not letting you talk first, but I felt like I was going to forget it if I didn't say it. So.
And I want to second, I've done a lot of research on the regretting, and the stats of regret, it's an even smaller percent of the 0.1% that regret is because of social pressure. Is why they, even if they did it as a kid, whatever the age, they get socially pressured to detransition. And obviously there's cases, but there's very few cases that people detransition that are doing it because they regret their transition. Mostly it stems from the outside world, making them feel like that's not who they are and that's not how they should identify.
Usually family.
Yep.
Their mental health. Like, I do think that is something that should be targeted a lot. Like, these kids, they need to be in therapy, not for like conversion or anything, but just because, there's so much hate on trans lives where they need to have someone to talk to get through that. I don't necessarily, and this is just from my personal experience and others that I know, I don't think the main reason kids are killing themselves is because they can't get surgery.
No,
I think there is a
agree with
much bigger issue, and that comes from everyone else that exists in the world.
Yeah.
And that's why I say I can get behind hormone blockers, for that will stop reproductive issues or organs from developing and whatnot. And then once you turn 18, you can get that surgery if you decide. But and I understand it's not the kid deciding, it's the parents and the doctors. But as a parent myself, like, I don't think I could ever agree to that.
But that's your choice. You get to have that freedom of choice. But other parents, we shouldn't rip away that freedom of choice from other parents who believe that that's right for their child, right? But that's all I'm arguing.
And I guess I understand that, but that's like changing, that's a permanent change for my kid. I guess, what age do you think someone should?
I can't make that determination. I think that we should look at WPATH guidelines and look at what doctors say and what the medical community says.
If my daughter came to me when she was 4 and was like, I'm a boy, and now she's 16 and says, I want to get the surgery, then I would maybe consider it because they would have lived their whole life like that.
Yeah, of course.
But if she came to me when she's 14 and says, I'm a boy now, and now he's 16, I'd be like, I can't quite get behind that.
I get that. I think what I'm just pointing out is I think that we should allow people to have the freedom of making those choices. And those are beautiful choices. You get to decide as a parent what you feel is right for your child. And I think that by saying, well, no, we shouldn't do any surgeries at all before the age of 18, it limits parents who may be in that situation where your child was 4 years old and she came out to, or he or she came out to you and wants to do the surgery. It prevents those parents from being able to say, yes, I approve of the surgery. So what I'm saying here is you should be able to raise your kids the way you want to raise your kids, but so should other parents. That's all I'm saying.
From a very personal perspective, this is kind of a double-sided coin. I look the way I look today because I've always struggled with my identity as myself too. So I don't want want to set that very clear. I have also always struggled with my identity, and I still do. And one thing that I would like to point out that I really liked what Paige said was gender affirming care is not only health care. And I do also want to say, though, gender affirming care is not only for trans people. And I feel like that is the one of the biggest misconceptions and one of the biggest stigmas around it. Viagra, that's gender affirming care. Implants, that's gender affirming care. Literally anything that anybody can get to change the way they function or change the way they look is gender affirming care. And I feel like
Testosterone for men.
exactly. And I feel like that is why, I feel like that's the biggest stigma. Like I think how Lex said, is that there's just a stigma around it. And I feel like if everyone can realize that it's not just for trans people, that will already just give a different understanding of it completely. And I feel like the biggest struggle right now when it comes to gender affirming care is the healthcare side of things. I want to say personally, I, like how you kind of said, you're kind of privileged with when you transitioned and when you came out, like people were very accepting of you. I want to say for me, I grew up as well, also very Catholic and conservative in Bum, Iowa, literally middle of nowhere, like maybe 1,000 people in my town. So I know exactly what it feels like to like be suppressed and to be misguided with who I wanted to be and who I was. And so I can understand where the gender affirming care with the haircuts come in, the clothes come in, and the way you want to visually present yourself. But when you want to physiologically change the way your body functions, because I feel like that is one thing that isn't talked about kind of on both sides, is yes, people can take hormone blockers, but what exactly is that going to do? So I feel like not only is it such like, honestly, low-key kind of a taboo topic to talk about, I feel like it's also very, like said, double-sided. People don't, I feel like it's not that people don't agree with it, but they don't know how to feel about it. And again, I feel like this was brought up maybe like 4 times. It is very person to person. Like you cannot change the way people feel about themselves. Like I always struggled with just where I grew up and with my own family. They wouldn't let me paint my nails. They wouldn't let me have long hair. Had a haircut every 2 months to ensure that. Like, so it's that kind of thing. It's that type of stuff where I feel like shouldn't even be part of this topic. Like, honestly, we should just let your kid get the damn haircut, or just let your kid grow out their hair. If your daughter wants to wear a blue shirt, give her a blue shirt. Like, at the end of the day, everything is colors. Everything is just, like said, people just see people when we look at each other. And so it's, like said, very double-sided when it comes to this. Socially, visually, yeah, with the haircuts, all of that, go ahead and do it. But I do think it gets a little more mushy when we get to the healthcare side of things. Like said, especially with minors. I do want to say one of my very good friends, it was a weird position for him. He transitioned near the end of 17, so his parents were still involved, but not really like with the process because he was almost an adult. And yes, they had to give permission, but at the end of the day, they couldn't because it happened after his birthday, so he would have been 18. And I feel like that is also where it gets a little mushy once again, is age. And I know that is one thing that you really brought up, was age and specifically. Like, yeah, if they came to you at a very young age and then they were still a minor and they came to you still and was like, I need this, then okay, maybe let's start to look into it. But I do want to say, I feel like it's age, really, especially once it comes to the simple things like the hormone blockers. And I want to say, I personally feel like people should at least try to go through that puberty aspect, because I feel like that is when it really shifts from childhood to being a teenager and becoming an adult. And yes, your frontal lobe isn't developed, but your brain developed a whole lot in a week while you were going through puberty and all that. So I do want to say I feel like that should definitely probably be the cutoff, at least, should be puberty age when they're getting out of adolescence and out of being a child. But yeah, like I said, it's a really messy subject. So I feel like there's not one right answer. So
Well, it's just tough because like puberty varies. So like some girls started their period at 10 years old. Some other people started at 15 years old, you know, like.
Some started at 8.
Yeah, like literally. And so it's tough when I understand what you're saying and I somewhat agree. Like I do agree with the permanency of things. I feel like it should be taken very seriously and everything should be looked at before that decision is made. My point of view, that's up to everybody's discretion in that situation. So in your situation, you don't want to let your kid do that under those circumstances. That's fine. That's totally fine. And if that's a problem later for the kid, then I trust you'll handle that the way that you would feel is best. And who am I to police that any other way? Before 18 is tough because, you know, you're still figuring out who you are. I can only tie it to my experience with figuring out or like coming to terms, I should say, that I'm gay. I've always been gay. I want to make that clear. But it's like I knew that for a long time, but I went back and forth. Am I bisexual? Am I lesbian? I don't know. Like, but there's no permanent changes that's being made to who I outwardly am. So like that's the difference, I guess. So I think it's just, you need to be aware, like it takes time to figure yourself out no matter who you are. You could be a straight person and you're figuring yourself out. And you're 25 and you still don't get that figured out. But as long as those correct conversations are being had and everyone is obviously taking it seriously, I think who are we to police it, like I've said.
I just wanted to ask you guys a question because it's related. It's just something that I heard almost everybody mention, which is like the separation between what would come to like the average person's mind, the healthcare side of things, and then like what is actually gender affirming care. Do you think children should be taught like gender identity and sexual orientation in school? And by children, I don't just mean like anyone under the age of 18. I guess in a specific, I would be meaning like elementary school children.
No.
It's touchy. I want to say that. Do I think we should be sitting them down and be like, okay, here are everything, like here's gay, here's trans, here's lesbian? No. But I can teach them about myself. I can teach them that I'm gay, that I like men, that I look the way I look because, but that's not me teaching them or telling them to be gay. And I want to say that is definitely, there's a very fine line, I feel like, between, mainly for conservatives, that is teaching and telling. They think just because we're teaching them something means we're telling them something and telling them to do something. And so, yeah, again, do I feel like we should be like straight up and just be, okay, here's a gay person, here's what they are, what they do, how they function, here's this, here's a trans person? No. But if it comes to myself, I will teach them about myself. I will tell them that I do like men. I will tell them that I'm gay and what that means. I will tell them just about myself. And that is still teaching them about it. So again, it's a very fine line situation. This, I feel like, definitely goes up to the educator and depending on who you're talking about and where you are in the world, honestly. But
Straight people don't have that, and I don't think that it needs to happen with like the LGBTQ plus community. I think you can talk about the queer community and be like, hey, this is the queer community. And like give them an open space. Like if you have questions or if you want to talk about it, come up to me. The same way they do like when you have health class, they're like, if you have more questions but you don't want to talk about it in front of the entire class, come up to me privately. And I think those are conversations that you can have. Both as a parent, you can have conversations like that. And I think educators, they don't need to be obviously like explaining what the definition, but if a kid has a question, I don't think that it's fair to them to be like, well, we're not allowed to, we don't talk about that. Because it's like the same with like religion is taught, everybody knows most religions, right? Depends on what school you go into, but you kind of get like I feel like there should be I don't know if it is like that now, but you get like a brief, this is what Christianity is, this is what certain religions do. And you kind of learn about their culture. And I think learning about LGBTQ culture is important because it's part of history. And so we can educate them about that, but we don't need to be educating them like, oh, this is what it feels like to like a boy, and this is what it feels like to identify as a lesbian. That is not what teaching about what queer culture is and like what it means to be queer. What it means to be queer is teaching about the history, about how like people have overcome things. I think that is the thing that needs to be taught about. We're not like the orientations, the identities. I think if you're interested and your interest is piqued by that, do your own research. 100%. That is how people find, the majors that they decide to go into. Because a topic was brought up, like for me, sociology, it's my major. Somebody talked about it. My teacher was talking about it. I was like, that's really interesting. I'm going to do further research on it. And then I fell in love with it. And I was like, this is what I want to do with my, career.
Do you think that it should be in the curriculum at any point during your schooling, from when you start school to when you graduate high school?
I think an easy place to put it in the curriculum is right when you teach about sex ed.
That was the other part of the question.
I think when you teach sex ed, I think we need to be more expansive about sex ed in the first place anyway. It is so, I came from a conservative small school. What I remember right is abstinence was what was taught. And in biology at least, and like how like periods work and stuff. But I think we need to be more expansive about sex ed. I think it should definitely include how to have safe sex and how to not get, how to recognize STDs and STIs and so on and so forth. But in that, it's a perfect opportunity to talk about gender expression and what that might look like and what you might be feeling during these times during puberty that align with the trans experience.
And I want to touch on that because I feel like when you're talking about, sexually transmitted diseases, right? You have AIDS, you have HIV. Those things you're going to be more prone to as like a gay man, for example. So there needs to be an education that you're going to be more prone. Just like if you're in a cisgender relationship and you have sex unprotected, that means that you're likely to have a child, that you could get pregnant from that. That needs to be more, the sex ed needs to be more inclusive, not just for queer people, but also for straight people, because it's just, I went to both a Catholic school during when I was in those ages where you learned about sex ed. I went to a Catholic school and I went to a public school. And the things that were taught were very similar. And it was, don't have sex. We're not going to talk about it for that long. These are all the scary diseases you can get. But they didn't talk about how you get them, what you do to prevent them. They gave us a banana and said, this is a condom, banana, put it on. Cool. What about for people who have vaginas, AFAB people? What does sexual protection look like for them? Cool. You told me what I need to do if I'm AMAB, but what about AFAB? I had no idea. I luckily was very privileged that my mom is sex positive and she talked about it, and we have a jar of condoms, dental dams, lube on my dining room table. That was an open discussion since I was young, not obviously a child, but since I was of age, around I want to say 13, she told me, hey, this is what it is. And we have a jar on our table. And if I have questions, I know I can go be like, hey, I don't understand what this means. And now I'm 21 and I feel like I have much more of an understanding of sex than I ever have. And every other 21-year-old I've met, that I've met personally, has no understanding of what it means to have safe sex as a queer person or even as a straight person. And so I think that's really important to, like what you said, expand sex ed.
I don't think sex ed is necessarily the only aspect we need to be looking at. So I will say yes, I do think, do I think it should be whatever, but do I think it could be and that it would be a problem if it was? No, I don't think it would be. And I feel like we could also kind of throw them into, like if we are going to talk about LGBTQ plus curriculum, I think it could also be thrown into like social studies and history at some point too. When it comes to social studies, obviously we're talking about people, civilizations, the way just life has been. Like social studies kind of goes kind of in part with history. You can literally just be like, okay, look at these two people. Which one's gay? Oh, you can't tell? Perfect. Like you can't, like I feel like that is kind of how we would need to teach them, is that we're all just people. And I know we have all been saying this the whole time, but it is literally as simple as that. We are all just people and we need to teach it like that. I will say, gonna take a step back, going back to sex ed, I do think not only does it need to be expanded on, but I think it just needs to be researched and it needs to be studied by doctors and scientists, because we all know how the cis man and cis woman body interact with each other when they get down, and we know how all of that stuff happens, right? And we know what chemicals get released, just how your body reacts. We have no idea how any of that stuff happens in same-sex couples. We don't know what kind of chemicals are getting released when two men are having sex or when two women are having sex. We don't know how we're gonna feel or if our body will change or what could happen. Like said, once again, it just needs to be expanded on, but not only expanded, it needs to be researched. Yeah, I wanna also try to share like a little bit of a different perspective for me, because to me, I didn't really go to a school that even teaches sex education. So that right there is already a challenge. Teaching kids about gender identity, as well as the difference between the sex that is assigned to your birth versus your gender identity, your sexual orientation, those kind of things. It is something that can be taught in like a very simple way that doesn't necessarily have to be sexual, or it doesn't really. At the end of the day, it's not really about sex. It's not just about sex. Because to me, that probably would have saved me from getting bullied because I was effeminate or weird, because I was like this little boy that didn't act the same way as the rest of the boys. And this little boy who was attracted to other boys. So, but couldn't figure it out myself, and no one was telling me what it meant. So I ended up hiding in the closet, pretending that I'm someone that's not, for such a long time. And that is a painful experience to have. And nowadays, it is more terrifying and challenging that so many kids still experience that to this day, because a lot of kids don't understand that some kids are just different. Like, we don't just like wake up and chose to be gay, or chose to be trans, or chose to be lesbian. At the end of the day, as crazy as it sounds, and as much as we try to explain this to a lot of people, it's just us. And to me, teaching that at an early age teaches these kids respect, teaches these kids empathy, teaches these kids a better understanding of each of our differences. That way we have a safer space for us to explore our journey as we grow up, as we go through our puberty, as we figure out who we are and what we want and who we want. I mean, nowadays there's a lot of people that are more expressive at a younger age. This is a very creative age. And also, internet is so accessible even to kids. We've called a lot of kids iPad kids, because they're just so used to using their iPads every day. And they're very smart kids. So if we don't teach it, or if we don't have our educators teach it themselves, they're just gonna find it somewhere else. And what if they find the wrong information? And that's what typically happens.
My first experience finding or knowing about trans people was online, and it was sexualized. which is horrible, but it's what's pushed because it's funny enough, it's what's popular among straight people. But your turn.
I was going to say, to go back to the original question you asked about if it should be taught in school. Like, to me personally, when I think of my kids, I'd rather be the one teaching them that. We have amazing teachers. Like, if my kid asked you questions, like, sure, like, answer her questions. But when it comes to reproductive health and stuff like that, I want to be the first one to tell my kids and bring them into that. And I know, like, there are some parents who aren't like that, but in an ideal world, it would be from the parents that are teaching that. Because, you have the people that learned that stuff from their parents. If they're comfortable talking about that stuff with their parents, they're less likely to get STDs. They're more knowledgeable about consent. Like, and that comes from the parents. And I can control what my kid is learning about. And if she goes to school and learns it from a teacher, I don't know what's being taught.
I do just want to make note on this because I haven't touched on it. I do think it should be taught to an extent. I do agree with what you're saying. I think majority of it should probably be on the parents or the family. But I will say my first experience ever hearing about a gay person was just that my aunt was gay. I didn't know any different, but they were like, yep, that's a lesbian. I was like, cool, sweet. Thought nothing of it. But me being a little secret lesbian, I was like, there's people like me. And then going through school, I'm still kind of having those confusing thoughts, but I'm putting on that front, hiding in the closet like you were saying. As far as like everything goes, media, education, diversity and representation matters. So I don't think we need a deep dive on it. And I think you made a really good point that it's not just sexual. It's literally just who we are, I just think it'd be nice to be like, this exists. Because if we're not talking about it, we're acting like it doesn't exist, in my opinion. So like, I think it should be treated, I think you sort of similarly said, like, that's just a regular old person, And if we just acknowledge, like, they're no different than the next person in a school setting like that, I think that would be really helpful for a kid. Just being like, okay, like, there are people like me, and if I want to go reach out to the teacher that offered more support, or I feel comfortable with my family or friends, then they can do that extra research. But I just do think it's important to at least throw it a little bit, sprinkle it in there a little bit, so people at least know.
Yeah, and I as somebody whose parents did, my mom very much advocated, and she told me what a lot of stuff meant, and I knew what it all meant. I still didn't come out because I didn't know that. I knew of queer people, I knew of trans people, but I didn't understand everything. And so I still did my own research, but I would have friends that came to me and they would be asking questions because their parents refused to talk about it. And I think that's where I struggle, is because I know a lot of parents want to avoid it. And the worst thing you can do is say, don't do this thing. That's the first thing a kid's going to want to do because you told them no, and they want to do the opposite. And so I think it's important to make sure, yes, I wish all parents, were like you and want to advocate and explain that to their kids and teach them. But I also want the kids who don't have that at home to have that open spot of like, hey, I'm here if you want to talk about it. And I think that's important. And I think too, with like having queerness in social studies is so important, because there's so much queer history that makes up the world. Like, there are so many big things, like the Stonewall riots, for one thing. That is such a big impact, and most queer people don't learn about that until they are much older. But that is such a big point in history, and there's no education on it because you're not allowed to talk about gay people at school. But there's obviously you get to learn about some religious things, but you're not allowed to talk about religion at school. So then that gets narrowed. And I think just, you can't, it's history, and it happened, and you can't erase that. So you can't just ignore that it didn't happen, because there's impacts from that. And I think it's important to continue to advocate for those things to be in school, because they're things that change you.
I think in the end, the people who need to make this decision about whether or not this should actually happen are educators in conjunction with mental health professionals who are experts in this field. I keep coming back to experts in this field, but I definitely think that I'm not educated enough to make decisions about the children in America as a whole. I think educators and people who are mental health professionals in the gender expression and or the trans community and sexual community or the sexuality community should make that decision in conjunction together if it's going to go into legislation or into act in schools.
Thanks for watching Counterpoint Extra. If you're into these highlights, head over to our main Counterpoint channel for the full episodes. The link is in the description.